Alright, 4.6 Savage here for a how-to and a very good explanation on how to do a PI swap. Now, we're going to explain what all parts you need and what all you have. Now, this swap guide only refers to Romeo engines. I want to make this clear. I have a Romeo engine. I do not know what all parts it takes to swap Romeo heads onto a Windsor engine or Windsor heads onto a Romeo engine. Romeo heads will always have bolt-on cams. Windsor will have press-on. But we'll go ahead and we'll start off with intake. Now, we're going to start by talking about just doing the intake swap, and then we'll move on to the cams and heads and everything. But first off, you're going to need your PI manifold from any vehicle that has PI heads, and you're going to need a Mustang heater tube. And I'll show you what I mean by that. Now, I'm going to clarify, my setup is not the same because I pulled the heater tube or the water pump tube out of a Crown Vic. So mine had to be bent and formed, and that's why I have different brackets than you're used to seeing. But we're going to go ahead and talk about it. Okay, first off, this tube here is the tube I am referring to. As you can see, it goes back and I have it bracket. It goes into your heater hose, but it comes from the water pump. That tube has to be bent like that for the PI intake, and I'll show you why. I've got a stock PI intake sitting over here, and you'll see that it's on the other side, but roll over. It has a way that the tube is supposed to sit, and I have to look at it more deeply. But the tube runs up against it, and see, it runs, and you normally run straight through on a not straight through the intake, but straight through on the bottom on a non-PI setup. And that is your heater tube. Now, you'll have to replace that and the heater nipple. The heater nipple, or the water nipple for the water pump. They're like $17 on American Muscle. It's been a while since I bought one. But it's this right here. Not this part, but what this part mounts to. As you can see there. You'll have to remove the water pump, which are these bolts right here, and whichever ones are underneath of it. And move the water pump, you'll tap it out, and you'll tap the new one back in. And then you'll insert the tube and mount the tube up, which will mount on the back of the head. After that, what you're going to need is the alternator bracket. The alternator bracket is, I'd have to find my alternator real quick. But the alternator bracket is for, what did I do with it? For your plug wires and everything to sit on top of and to clip and to hold the alternator in place. What did I do with that alternator? And that doesn't have the plate on it. Because the plate's probably still on the wire somewhere or fell down. No, not really worried about it. But the plate is different than the non-PI plate. The non-PI plate will not mount onto PI heads. It's shorter, I do believe, and the PI is longer. Like I said, if I could find it, I would show y'all. But then, after you got all that done and have all those parts, you'll have to put a little bit of RTV. Of course, these are PI heads, but there'll be markings here, and you have to put a little bit of RTV on it to match the cylinder heads. And you'll put the PI gaskets on, and you'll RTV around the gasket to make sure it seals. And then when you actually switch to PI heads, you won't have to worry about that because that'll be on your old heads. But that's really all you have to do for a PI intake swap. Now we're going to talk about the head swap. All right. First things first, we'll talk about my setup. My setup is a 2001 bullet head, and this is the new camshaft installed, by the way. It's a 2001 bullet head with 81,000 miles on it when I put them on. It's now got about 10,000 more, so 91,000 to 100,000-ish, just estimating there. I reworked these heads. I took the oil plugs out. I took all of it. I pulled the tensioners, pulled the cams, took and sprayed these down and pressure washed them, and then blew them out and pressure washed them. I relapped the valves. I put new valve seals in it. I put new followers and new lifters in. I always recommend putting new lifters in. That way you don't have to go back and do it later. Now with my setup, I went with the GT500 followers, and we're going to explain what they are. Alright, these little things here, right where my light is, that's the follower. They're to what push rod engines would call rocker arms. When the lifter pushes up, it pushes the valve down, and it rides. Can't get a clear enough view. It rides right on the cam lobe. So the lifter will adjust your valve. Since it's hydraulic, will adjust your valve tightness. I can't think of the correct word. You're gonna have to forgive me for that. But the tightness of the valve, and your cam will push the valve down with the follower. Now, what makes these followers special? Well, they're made of a higher strength metal than the stock ones. These are the ones that come on the GT500s and the Ford GT 5.4s. Now, when you add these, what they are is they're stronger. Thus, it means when the cam presses it down, it's less valve deflection, which means more valve lift, which means your valve goes down farther. They also have one that are like called Jessel followers that are an even more advanced race version of these, and they're like $1,000. These were like $200. All in all, I already had the intake and the alternator bracket when I did the head swap. I paid like $225 for my heads, and the rest of it went into new tensioners. I went ahead and I put the followers, the lifters on. I reworked the valve seals. I put about $800 worth of parts into these heads. But when you swap them, that's what you're gonna want to get those, and you're also gonna want to check your tensioners. I had one tensioner that was bad, so I went ahead and replaced both of them. My chains look good and my guides look good, so I didn't replace them. But we're gonna move on to what you'll need for the cylinder heads. When you go to swap the cylinder heads, you're going to need the Ford Racing head changing kit. This comes with new exhaust manifold gaskets and new head gaskets that are meant for the PI swap, which there's no difference in the head gaskets except for oil ports. But we're going to go ahead and tell you about the bolts. When you try to do the PI swap, there will be a couple of bolts. Assuming you're doing it in the car, there will be a couple of bolts. I think it's like these two rear ones right here or maybe these two right here, when you pull them out, they will hit the shock tower. And they will come out, but the problem is, you won't be able to fully pull them out of the head. So in order to remedy this, what they do is they give you several rubber boots, and you put the rubber boots around the bolt, and it holds the bolt up from the head, so you can pull the head off. Now, what I did is I lifted these with 2 people, and it's easier with 2 people, and I recommend it because each one of these heads now, for all you people that have had push rods, have done heads on push rods, I already know the heads on those weigh like 90 to 100 pounds because they're cast iron. But it's still awful heavy lifting these aluminum heads by yourself, because these aluminum heads without cams weigh like 45 pounds. And the cams probably at it make it 50, 55, if that. Probably makes it like 47, because the cams don't weigh that much, honestly. But you think you're pulling it off. I pulled mine off with the exhaust manifolds. Now I have headers now, so it's gonna. Those of you who have long tubes, you're probably gonna have to go ahead and pull your engine in order to do the PI swap, unless you unbolt your headers first. Because I don't believe there's a way you can pull these heads and put them back in with the long tube headers on. But anyway, we'll go back to the swap. Now you go ahead, and after you get your head changing kit, you'll remove the heads. You'll look to see if there's any damage on the piston, see if anything needs to be replaced. That's about it for that. You'll go ahead and bolt on the new heads, gaskets, go ahead and lube up your thing. When you're reassembling the PI heads, even if you've had the cams out, go ahead and use this stuff. Make sure you get the moly graphite. It's meant to dissolve in the oil, and it helps to make sure everything's lubricated before you start it up. That's why my cams currently have them. You want to make sure that your cams and everything is timed, because you'll have to take the timing chains off. Now, I'd have to find my paper, but I'm going to do another video on timing a 4.6. I did not pull my chains, and I do not have a set of chains, so I won't be able to tell you how to time it. But I can, for a fact, tell you it's very easy. I think it's something like grab 2 ends of the chain and pull it tight, and then put one on the dot on the cam gear and one on the dot underneath, and slip them on, and it's timed. And you got to make sure they don't come off the dots, and that's it. It's really a 2-person job, but I figured out how to hold the cam gear when I did the cams, so that wasn't an issue. So let's say you've already finished your PI swap. Okay, you're ready to start it up. Well, this is the time when I go and think, well, have I done my spark plugs and whatnot? At this time, I had not done spark plugs, so I decided to do spark plugs. What a lot of people recommend, because you are running higher compression, a lot of people will recommend the copper auto lights. They are number 764, I do believe. I love the coppers. The idle quality was amazing. They're not. I used to run platinums before, and I've had some V powers and all that. It's really up to preference of what you use, but a lot of people use the 764s for one specific reason. They are 1 step colder than the stock plug, and that makes it easier on your ignition system for the higher compression. It's more tuned. Now, I would close your gap a little bit. Like, I run my plugs at 48. Stock is like 54 to 50. I I've ran them at 46 and I didn't like it, and I've ran them at 50 and didn't like it. So 48's where I keep mine. Yet again, that's up to personal preference. Some like a bigger gap. I also still have stock coil packs. I may change my gap once I add Screaming Demon coils. But for now, that's it. I recommend when you get your PI intake to bathe it. And what I mean by bathe it is I'll show you here. You'll take, and I'm not sure if you can see in there, but there's a whole bunch of oil deposits. And these cars don't come with oil separators, and unless you put your own in, you're not getting an oil separator. But what you're going to do is you're going to take like some just greaser, like Mean Green or something, and you're basically going to pour it in there, and you're going to run water through it, and you're going to scrub out the intake ports. And see, I really don't want to flip it because I have all my bolts in there. But as you can see, like here, there's all this oil deposit and everything, and you'll clean it up. You want to make sure you get all that oil deposit out so it's not recirculating in your engine. Because a lot of these, if you get it from like a Crown Vic, most Crown Vics were cop cars. What do cop cars do? They sit in idle. When a car sits in idle, all you do is you get blow by, and you get a lot of exhaust gas recirculating, and you get all that burnt oil up in your intake. Now, like I've said before, I have deleted my EGR. My EGR will make it easier to change intake manifolds. You don't have to pry up on the EGR tube. I do recommend an EGR delete kit, but only if you have a tuner that's able to turn off the EGR check engine light, or else you're going to run into the problem of, not having your car's just going to run with the check engine light. So you'll put on the heads, you'll do the intake. Now, a lot of people, and this is a big debate, I didn't do it and it ran fine. When a lot of people say when you put on PI heads, you should tune. Keyword there is should. Me and my grandfather have always had this big, what would you call it? I guess theory that the computer's smart enough to adapt, at least for compression. Compression really doesn't change anything, and your cam profile is not that radical. Just like the cams I have in it are actually smaller lift than the PI cams, but I have more duration. The engine will adapt to it to a certain point. There's a point when your engine just can't adapt anymore, and that's when a tune comes into place. What a tune is for, and this is what a lot of people don't understand, a tune is for adding more horsepower to basically upping your timing in certain areas of the RPM range, and also going ahead and messing with your fuel trims. When you mess with the fuel trims, you get more power because you're not running as rich in some areas, which also improves gas mileage. That's why when you have these economy tunes, you can get 30 miles per gallon, and when you're running the power tune, you get like 5. But it's a very simple swap. I did it in like 3 days. It's not that hard. You can do it in a weekend. You do have to be careful what you're doing, though. Now, I'm going to be honest with you. I was scared to death when I first did this. I was like, I'm going to put the cams back in. It's not going to be timed right. The engine's going to say, don't worry about all that. If it jumps, it jumps. If you're willing to do this, you got to take that risk. And it's not really a risk. You really can't screw it up. Honestly, these are performance cams. I did these performance cams in like 10 minutes. Most of it was just finding the stuff and putting the cam gear back on, and then finding out that the cam bolt was different. That's why it took me so long. I still have the other side to do, but that's another video time, because I never did show you how to install. But the PI swap, okay, the intake I think is like 15 wheel horsepower. A lot of people have come up with, and the heads are like 50 to 60 horsepower with cams. Now a lot of people, I've seen it run both ways. A lot of people will do PI intake and PI cams on the non-PI head. Believe it or not, the non-PI head with PI cams makes more torque than a PI head with PI cams. And I do believe that's because of the intake and exhaust valves because they're smaller. But I'm not sure. I think the higher lift of the cam, the non-PIs actually flow pretty good when you're at a high enough lift. Problem is getting it to that high enough lift without aftermarket cams. But that's beside the point. I recommend a PI swap for anyone who is planning on who needs more horsepower. It's one of the first mods you should do, because a lot of people, and I know a couple of you watching this video, this goes especially out to two-tone, two-valve. A lot of you think the 4.6 is a weak, powerless engine, but once you slap those PI heads on it, it becomes a whole different thing. Now, a lot of you are going to watch this video and be like, well, the 4.6 is a low-power engine. I'm not going to lie to you. It is a low-power engine. But when built right, it can be a nice little drag racer. From what I've been told, my current setup should get me into 12s. That's NA. That's not running boost. That's not running things. I'm not in coyote territory yet, but I'm close. I still have to push it over that edge. So, what I'm meaning to say is, if you're willing to buy a 4.6 liter 2 valve, you have to stick with it. You know, you can just give up and go get a better car. But a lot of people, the 3 valves aren't much better. I'm not going to lie to you. The only real power makers you're going to get is dual overhead cam 4.6s. And even those are still, most of those are turbo and supercharger builds. Because you can take the Termi engine, which is a 4 valve, and turn it into, just by swapping a pulley, you're making 390 at the wheels. But you go back to the 2 valve, let's say, let's just take this into comparison. This is a 97. Stock 97 horsepower, 215. 97 horsepower, the PI version was 260. When you PI swap, you get 275, supposedly. From what I've read on the forums, that's what it is. I've never dynoed my car. When I get the cams done, the transmission done, all of it set and done, it will be dynoed. That will be a video for y'all to watch, because I am aiming at the 300 wheel horsepower mark. That is my goal. I should be running 300 at the wheels through an automatic transmission. That means I should be running like 350, 360 through the crank. But there's a lot of people who said they've done similar builds and even higher builds than I, and I've only gotten 100 and some. So a lot of it is just wishful thinking. You'll never know. But I do know, with my current rear end setup and just this with PI heads and long tubes on it, I was taking out 3 valves. Now, were they probably stock 3 valves? Yeah. But there's still 3 valves. I'm in, you're running into the 3 valve GT category, and unless they've got some serious mods, i.e. a Pro Charger, even a bolt-on 3 valve probably isn't as powerful as a 2 valve, because the 3 valves were meant to be a little bit more horsepower and a little bit more torquey because of their charge motion plates, which basically open and close the intake manifold, and they allow more torque to be produced. But that's beside the point. For all of you though of you that are contemplating a PI swap, it's worth it. But make sure you do it right. Don't do it half-assed and then be like, well, my car is slow. Also, don't do it and be like, well, I'm going to win against a Coyote. You're not. You probably, without having a tune and having rear end, you probably won't even be able to go up against 3 valves. You might not. It's all dependent on the driver. For all honesty though, the PI swap does not take your gas mileage away. The only downfall to the PI swap that I know of is the fact that you have to run premium. And you really don't have to run premium. I get away with mid-grade sometimes. It still pings when you're in high RPM, but as long as you stay out of high RPM, you'll be all right. So that means merging into traffic, don't get on it, and you won't ping. But the actual octane number you should run for these engines with a PI swap is 91 octane. And where I live, we do not have 91 octane, so I have to settle for 93. Now, because of that, I've already tuned my vehicle for 93 anyway. And that's another video I will be doing shortly. We'll be tuning on Sniper Force tuning software, because I know a lot of you have wondered about that and really don't know. I know Horseplay Motoring tried to do a video on it, but he got screwed over with his tuner. But mine works. Now, you can, if you get it brand new, it's like $300. I got mine used still with 2 bullets on it, and that allows me to tune 2 vehicles or 2 ECUs. And your ECUs are locked. You can buy additional bullets for like another $300, and I think it only comes with 1. But that's that. Alright, well, that's going to be all for this video. Like and subscribe, and if you would like to support my channel, go ahead and click on that Patreon link and go ahead and subscribe. It's only $1 a month. It's not required. It's just for me to get tools to better my recording equipment and my mechanic ability. But go ahead, like and subscribe this video, tell your friends, make sure you watch this and understand. PI swaps aren't hard. They really aren't. A lot of people make them out harder than they are. It's basically slapping a set of heads and intake on. As long as you've got the parts from the intake, it's not that hard. A lot of people start out with the PI intake first. I did the PI intake first. I noticed it was a whole different car after the PI intake. Because, do understand, I know how y'all feel. It's a slow car from stock. The PI heads on it should have been on there from the get-go. There should have been no 9904 revision. It should have been on there from 96 when the 4.6 first came out. And the Mustang, I should refer to. But that's going to be all for this video, so like and subscribe, and go ahead and check out my other videos. Just remember, be savage.